One in 5 women, 1 in 5 men, 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health condition during their lifetime. Mental health conditions will affect those close to us, those we love, those we work with, our friends, neighbors, and our families. When a mental illness touches one of us, it impacts the whole family. This film is an introduction for families who are just beginning their journey. We will share the experiences and insights of the many families who have made the journey before you.
Every family is affected. It knows no barriers. It is an illness for all people. It is the #1 health issue in this country, probably in the world, I would say. 1 in 5, they say, are impacted, but that's 1 in 5 that we know about. So there are many people who are impacted that we don't even know about, so that number is probably greater. And if you do the 6 degrees of separation, probably everybody in this country is touched, impacted, affected, knows someone who has been touched by mental illness. And I bet you in this group that's sitting in this room, probably one of us has had direct contact with mental illness in our world. It's that pervasive.
While one person has the mental health condition, the whole family experiences it. Every single person is going to have their own balance, their own equation, their own chemistry slightly changed by the fact that someone they love and close to them is going through this. And I think to look at the fact you need a lot of resources and support for the family member, but everybody should take their own pulse and listen to how they're feeling and think about how it's affecting them and consider their own concerns and to start looking at it almost like a teeter-totter. If you were at balance and now something's happened and it's a little bit out of whack, it's good for you to bring new resources and new people and new energies so that you can put things back in balance. And it's not just the person with a mental health challenge, it's everybody. And it might just be one conversation with somebody who also knows what you're going through.
The first time I ever knew anything was wrong, and I can't even say the word mental health or mental illness because back in the day, and I'm talking in the 40s and 50s, we didn't even have language for it. We didn't use any language. I remember coming home from school one day, and back in that day, not to have my mother in the kitchen was a bit astonishing. It's hard to believe right now, but back then it was, well, where could she possibly be? Eventually, I found her lying in bed, fast asleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that signaled the start of decades-long bearing witness to my mother becoming severely, severely ill. She was a dynamic, outgoing, vivacious, friendly, accomplished woman who simply started to fade away. I often use the term, it was like a colored photograph turning into sepia. And just fading away. When she wasn't asleep, she was crying. And when she wasn't crying, she was sobbing and yelling and screaming. This went on for years and years, and from the vantage point of being a child, it was confusing, it was frightening. In many ways, it was embarrassing because my friends' mothers didn't behave like this.
It was rough on the entire family. We were kind of thrown into a tornado of this thing called mental health, which none of us understood at that point. I'm not sure if I'd actually even heard the phrase mental health at that point. The word depression to me was not depression in the sense of a mental illness. It was the Great Depression. That's the only mention of that word I'd heard before. So it kind of threw us into this storm, this tornado, this dark place where we were searching for a light, but we couldn't find it.
I first noticed my daughter, something was wrong. It was really subtle though. She was withdrawing and I didn't really understand it because my daughter and I are really close as a single parent. But I knew something was really wrong. She told me she was hearing voices. I had a pamphlet on the coffee table. I was being checked out for narcolepsy at the time because I have health issues myself. And one of the severe symptoms of narcolepsy is hallucinations, and she just read that. And that reading about it made her comfortable to tell me, because she had been hiding it for almost a year, that she was sort of hearing things intermittently. And when she told me, I immediately thought of her father and that she likely had schizophrenia. The one thing I knew about schizophrenia was that you heard voices. I didn't know anything else about it, but that was something that was sort of common knowledge.
You know, it went in tandem with a deep sadness and depression, not wanting to live anymore, and thoughts that, you know, he was better off pretty much dead than alive. And he would make these comments to my mother, and that, you know, he felt like, you know, he wasn't the sole breadwinner anymore, and he felt useless, helpless, hopeless. He started to kind of distance himself from everyone, isolate himself. You know, me and my brother going through school and all these kinds of things that we kind of, we saw it and we didn't. My mother was home a lot. She became the primary caregiver, so she saw a lot of it. She got the brunt of most of it. It got to a point where we said, you know, he needs to be assessed because there's something going on.
You know, now looking back, that was a life changer. Schizophrenia walked into her life unannounced, uninvited, just basically changed her life. She was in the Ontario College of Art. She'd been to university. She is an incredible artist, and that stopped all that. And she still has that in her, but you know, the illness has eclipsed that many times.
There's various impacts on a family. The family is the foundation to our community, and when someone's affected with a mental health concern within a family, it puts a hold on the entire family. And that's because they don't have an appropriate education at times, therefore they're stuck in trying to understand it as well. And sometimes they think it's their fault. So it kind of breaks down the family in that sense. However, through education, advocacy, and empowering families, they tend to build up that team support again. So it's just a matter of us professionals to tap into that and assist families, because there's a lot of coping strategies that already exist within families and they don't necessarily realize it.
As a family member of people living with mental health disability, you deal with a lot of emotions, and there's positive emotions and negative emotions, and you become really frustrated because you see that your family member is not dealing with their mental health disability, that you could step in and help them out. You can make life a lot easier. So it's frustrating, but you can't just take care of them. You can't just step in there and make them better. Sometimes there's a chemical imbalance. Sometimes they need medication or they need professional help that we as family members are unable to give. We can support them, but it's frustrating because you kind of feel like your hands are tied and that you can support them, but you can't do too much more.
I was a kid who went from being very social to like a switch went off, and all of a sudden I was the opposite. I was a loner. It felt like a dark side of the world kind of opened up to me that I had not seen before. An ugliness in the world that I had not seen before. Just a part of, you know, a negative experience of life that I had no idea even existed. And it kind of just you know, fell into my life like an avalanche, and I was completely overwhelmed by it and didn't know how to handle it, if I could handle it, and realistically, I didn't handle it at the time.
When the initial diagnosis was made, it was, you know, the news is devastating. For any parent to be told that your child has an incurable illness is absolutely, you know, it was just indescribably painful. So there's a period of I guess, just a sense of being shattered. That's the only way to describe it. And tremendous fear and anxiety, and a great deal of heartache on behalf of your child. We all want our children to be healthy and to have a bright future to look forward to, and to be presented with this diagnosis was probably the worst experience of my life.
And at first it was a slew of diagnoses, and they couldn't figure it out. Was it PTSD? Was it depression? Was it this or that? And then they kind of like funneled it down to a few of them, and he was on a ton of medication, and it was up to me and my mother to really, you know, divvy out the medication, make sure he takes it, and, you know, dealing with the side effects of medication, and, you know, and the symptoms were still there. The behavior was still there. It took a long time to really fine-tune it. It took a huge toll on my family. The way I see things when situations like this happen, it can go two ways. It can either strengthen a family and bring them closer together, or it can tear it apart.
Sometimes when somebody actually gets a diagnosis, it's a relief for a family member, because they think, maybe now my loved one can get the care that they need. For others, there's a lot of denial, still trying to make excuses, maybe thinking, oh, it's my loved one is hanging around in the wrong crowd or using a lot of weed or whatever. For some, a lot of depression, anxiety about the future. And you know, when we're thinking about early intervention, particularly in psychosis, there's a lot of hope for the recovery, but families already, they feel absolutely overwhelmed by this news and thinking about, how am I going to proceed? How am I going to get through this? Already thinking about what's going to happen when I'm no longer.
When we have initial contact with the family, there's a long journey. The first is that they find out that their family member has a mental health concern, and that puts a lot of stress on them, because they're thinking, how can this happen to my family? Was it my fault? As parents, they assume that they did something wrong, but really they did not cause a mental health concern, and they cannot control it. Here at FAME, we go by the 4 C's, which is, I did not cause the mental illness, I cannot control the mental illness, I cannot cure the mental illness, but I can't cope with the mental illness. So during our first interaction with the family, we reiterate that, and we see the family really stressed out, and that really stands out to families. And through that process, as sessions go on or as more interaction takes place within FAME, we notice that family members start realizing that, wait a minute, it's not my fault, it's just something that happened, but I can cope with it and help my family member and myself. So you see that journey. I would say there's steps to each phase. So the first is shock, confusion, a sense of loss, and then you see families regain that strength again over time. At the end, I wouldn't say the stress is completely gone, because there are different challenges that come in life, but everyone has challenges, right? It's just a matter of someone assisting them in recognizing that there are ways to get past those challenges.
Family members become major players in recovery. We've come to realize in the last few years that they are the crisis management, they are the housing people, they provide financial support, emotional support, they become often case management, they become the advocate for the person who's ill, they speak on their behalf everywhere from the ODSP office to sometimes the courthouse. And they become the lifeline. And often when a person isn't well, it's the family member who has to step up. And about 70% of people with a mental illness live with a family member. And of that other 30%, about 70% of that group have daily or weekly contact with a family member. So that tells you how much of a role family members play in the recovery and in helping their family member live and cope in their life with mental illness.
There are various roles that family members play. They play as a caregiver, the parent, the brother, the sister, but as well advocates in the community, because they want to help the person with a mental health concern. So therefore they're out there trying to find the appropriate services, trying to get involved in social activities or events in order to get that assistance. So they're not only playing the brother or the sister role or the mother, but as well as advocates and frontline caregivers, as well as many social workers, I would say, because they're doing all that.
My parents had issues with language, so I was already kind of part of the process, kind of translating and acting as an interpreter, diplomat, all these kinds of things, you know. And I find that with children of parents of immigrants that, you know, having difficulty with language, I felt I was very part of the process. From visits to doctors, translating letters, phone calls. So I was kind of really feeling like I was really a part of the recovery process. That you know, I wasn't off on the sidelines just watching. That they really pulled me in and said, you know what, you know, we need your help, you know, with this, this, and this. And I felt like I was part of the process. So I think, you know, tackling things as a family is a huge part of our recovery process.
So as a family member, I feel I've kind of worn a lot of hats and played a lot of different roles in the family, being mother to my siblings, being parent to my parents, being the educator, being the one taking control and saying this is what needs to be done, this is where we need to go to get help. We need professional help. Just talking about it as a family is not going to do anything anymore. That's a good thing to do, but we need to go beyond that now. We need professional help. We need to see a doctor or a counselor or a psychiatrist. We need to go to support groups. We need to educate ourselves.
My closest friend in the world, my sister, took a completely different tact. She basically said, what do we do? How do we do it? What do I have to do? How can I help you? And she was the one who visited me constantly, even when I didn't want her to, even when I was angry, even when I was in such despair that her very presence, it didn't matter. I am always going to be here. I am always going to fight for you. We are never going to give up. Never. We're never going to give. We will find the right medication. We will find the right doctor. We will find the right treatment.
It takes tremendous energy, and it really does feel like okay, we're launched on a long-term project here. It's very complex. There are many players, but it's all with a view towards restoring the emotional health of your loved one. So, and it's a very long process. It's a very long process. It requires a great deal of patience. It requires just that ability to hang on, and to recover. There's a whole recovery phase whereby you feel like you've been dealt a blow by life, and you need to slowly get back to a sense that, no, you know, this has been a tremendous blow, but we will survive, we will recover, and we will move forward, that life can be good again.
I educated. That was the first thing. The program had early intervention program, PEP program in London. Had psychoeducation for the families. That was critical. I went separately myself down there with my partner for that. And the other thing was connecting with the family support group there. I stayed within the mental health community at that point. I didn't even really talk to my family too much. I didn't know too much about what was going on. It was just, there's this disease happening and I'm kind of freaking out because my boyfriend went through this and I didn't know if my daughter was going to go through the same thing, and I've just, you know, going through the motions, going through the steps. But here's these things that they told me they had. They had an education group, they had a family support group. So I did all those things because I knew that I didn't have access to those things, and it was a terrible outcome. So it was just autopilot, you know, and connecting.
We started by speaking to the family doctor. We made appointments for our son to see the family doctor, and each appointment was broken because he wouldn't go. And then we started watching talk shows and going to meetings and gathering information. And the turning point came one night in May 2002 when I attended a FAME meeting, and I came home with a book entitled Learning About Schizophrenia, Rays of Hope, published by the Schizophrenia Society of Canada. And the book opened up my eyes to the seriousness of mental illness. And I remember that I felt that I had left one universe behind and I had stepped into a new universe, and that my life was changed forever. And this knowledge that I received was a tremendous gift.
There comes a trial and error period during which various medications were tried. And the first two medications that were administered had some pretty serious side effects. And that was very, very difficult. So my son's dad, because he has a background, he is a psychiatrist, actually took an initiative and contacted a colleague. And when our son was placed on yet a third medication, things began to improve tremendously. On the basis of finding the appropriate medication and the appropriate dosage. So this took place over a long period of time, however, probably about 2 years. It was probably about 2 years before the medication began to have a positive effect. And our son's behavior and mood began to improve, and stability, stability was achieved.
I was hospitalized for a number of weeks with my illness. I then did like a 3-week kind of course and different coping mechanisms and things like that as an outpatient of the hospital. I continue to go to the hospital and see a psychiatrist who maintains my medications at the proper levels. I don't tell too many people that because of the stigma, but I mean, if I had diabetes or something, I wouldn't be afraid to tell people. So it's important for people to understand that it's not your fault. It's in my case, it's a chemical imbalance that is quite well addressed with medication and the proper community supports. So just keep reaching out until you find the people that are going to help you within the community, and band together, and don't be ashamed to ask for help, because it's not a weakness.
Look in my geographic area for what services are in the catch basin of where I live, and how can I get to them. And you start to prioritize them. and you find out who's got the longest waiting list and who's got the shortest waiting lists, and how can you circumvent things. And you can get pretty Wile E. Coyote-ish, and they say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and there's a lot of truth to that old adage. And that's what I tell family members all the time. Keep hammering and chipping away at things, and keep asking hard, tough questions.
Don't give up. It's a frustrating experience, especially when you're just starting on the journey and you're coming up against barriers and everything seems to be negative and you're so frustrated and there's so many waiting lists. And don't get frustrated. Don't give up, because there's so much help out there.
The more your disappointment and your hurt feelings kind of envelope you in a buffer, the longer it's going to be to go forward. So I think the biggest thing I can offer from my family's experience and the experience I've had with my brother directly is to take some time to obviously go through the emotions you're feeling and start to look outside of the family for people to talk to and information, and to start building bridges outside. So a bridge can be to your GP. A bridge can be hopefully to a psychologist if there's some talk therapy involved, to a psychiatrist if you're lucky enough for medication, to a family support group to learn what other families go through, to talking to your friends and other family members. And you're soon going to find out that you're not the only family going through it, that everyone has a family member or a good friend or a spouse that has gone through these situations, and you're going to find out that there are a lot of resources, and that's going to make you feel a lot better about the situation, which is going to make you feel calmer and more positive and more accepting, and that is kind of the energy that needs to be invested in that will get you through that kind of road that you need to take between the time when your family member is first going through their situation to the end of the road where they're feeling back into some sort of balance. And the family has a feeling of being on solid ground again.